everybody. Welcome back to the Uncannery, season 2 of the Uncannery.
Big 2.
I'm Don.
I'm Ron.
I'm Doug.
And we're here again. So how was your weekend, everybody?
Oh my gosh, such an incredible weekend. It was the first weekend of October. That means Halloween is coming up. Can I get a woof woof?
No, because Halloween's not about dogs. It's about cats, typically, which I'm very excited about.
It's about dogs. It's about werewolves.
Werewolves.
Those are
weredogs.
big dogs.
Right.
But
My dog.
A traditional cat gets its due, finally, especially black cats.
Was that your sound that your cat makes?
Such a great cat.
When it's really
Is your cat
ferocious.
dead already?
No. It's its last breath. Thanks for the life.
Yeah.
So dumb.
Have you picked out your Halloween costumes yet?
I have. I'm planning on. I have a partner in crime when it comes to teaching that we have like similar sections, and he's kind of doing a punk rocker theme, and so I'm going to go goth rock, and we're going to kind of. So there's like a little bit of similarity, but a little bit of rivalry too, across the hallway. But, yeah.
So you're going to do the eyeliner and everything?
I was thinking about that. I've got a Sisters of Mercy shirt. I've got some giant leather boots that I used for a pro wrestling outfit last year, but they're going to be reappropriated. And then, black pants, eyeliner, wig. We should be good. Yeah. You got to get the wig, though.
I've also been co-opted by coworkers who have created a theme for me. And the theme they went with is the Pixar film Inside Out. Which is a film about emotions, and the characters are all very sort of distinct.
Are you going to be Bing Bong?
That's exactly who I'm going to be. Because everyone took all the notable characters, and I did a quick look on Amazon, and there is like an atrocious Bing Bong costume. And I've only seen this film once, and I think I vaguely remember who Bing Bong is, but he's like an elephant who's a hobo. And that's kind of me. That works.
Elephant hobo describes you. Yeah. I fell asleep in that movie.
I don't think I fell asleep. I just don't remember that much. I would think it was like clever. I think it was like Pixar's films now are just like so. The metaphor is so
on the nose.
Yeah, like just so transparent.
Yeah,
it's like the metaphor is the film. The next movie is going to be called Metaphor.
A film about something else.
Yeah.
Coming to a theater near you. Yeah.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, but nothing spooky, I guess. Don, do you have a spooky costume in store? Are you going to be an alien or something?
I'm going to be the Invisible Man.
Because you're going to be in Bermuda. No.
Turn the lights off and pretend that we don't live here. But I used to. If you'd caught me in my youth, I would definitely have been dressing up with the monster makeup and stuff.
What was everyone's scariest costume they ever had?
Okay. Oh, I need to think. Don, do you have that?
Well, my go-to was the standard. It involved I had to make rice every year. So you make rice with coffee grounds. It makes it kind of maggoty looking, and I could glue that on my face with some liquid latex, so it kind of looked like a big old maggoty pustule popping out my face. So that was my go-to with a Renaissance shaggy peasant
I like that.
That was sick. You're like I'm the Black Plague victim.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Oh.
Mine was a Dilophosaurus.
What?
Yeah, tell us about that.
He's the dinosaur in Jurassic Park that spits at Newman.
Yeah.
But I found this mask in the Halloween store, and I thought that was so cool. And it was just the head of the dinosaur, and then like 2 gloves for his taloned hands, and that was it. And so I think I just wore like a green, like summer camp T-shirt and walked around like a dinosaur.
Does it have the frill?
No, it didn't have the frills, just the head.
You just walk around and you just spit at people?
Honestly, I probably spit on myself more because I found out a latex mask is freaking awful and hot, and I was just like drooling and sweaty, and I think probably only lasted 2 hours before I took it off.
I don't know if it was my scariest, but I'm thinking of this since you said latex mask, because last year I was Mankind is the name of this professional wrestling I'm going to say identity, because the wrestler is Mick Foley, but he had like several different wrestlers that he played. He was Cactus Jack, Dude Love, Sometimes he would literally just go by Mick Foley, but then he created this character that he was best known for, which was Mankind, which was this. He had a leather mask that was kind of stripped together over his face, a tie, and a ripped white collar kind of shirt, and brown pants, wrestling boots. And I think the commentary was like the disturbing nature of Mankind, because he's like an office worker, but he's also kind of Leatherface, but he's also, it's like, this is Mankind, this is what we've been stripped to. I'm not even sure.
I saw American Psycho. Like,
yeah.
So your scary
I can Pixar this
costume was a scary wrestler.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think it qualifies. Yeah, it did freak a lot of people out.
They're like, oh God, that's Mankind.
Yeah, that's who we are.
Oh God, that's a shallow and terrifying reflection of myself.
Metaphor was not on the nose. I was so bummed out by Pixar movies. I went, let's go back to the classics right there. Somebody saw me though, and they said, Are you a dominatrix? I said, no, definitely not. They just saw leather and immediately thought that. And then the boots. And I think that was what did it.
And then they gave you the box of raisins anyway.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that'd be my pick for now. I'm trying to think of other ones, but yeah, that's probably it.
Well, I actually want to talk to y'all about spooky things today. So since it's
perfect.
Ron, are you going to be okay?
Yeah, I'll be fine.
All right.
You can hold him. It's okay.
Okay.
Eyesight closer to Doug.
Hey, buddy.
Are you familiar with the story of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving? Have you heard that one before? Have you read that before?
Ooh, Johnny Depp.
Yeah, that's literally the only point of reference. I think there's also a cartoon I may have seen like in elementary school.
It's a famous Disney cartoon.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah.
To be fair, I haven't read it. I'm aware that it is a literary work first. But I do love is it 99 when that came out? 1999 Sleepy Hollow?
I don't know.
Man, did I love it.
Really?
I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping it lives up.
I remember having a different reaction, but
I did too.
I loved it. I enjoyed the Christopher Walken's character. I thought like his design was like really creepy. And I love the Headless Horseman. I thought that they did a good job with the design specifically. Story, I can't remember.
Ron, are you familiar?
With the legend, not tremendously, no more.
So you haven't read it?
No, I've never read it. Is it who Stephen something? Who's the author?
Washington Irving.
Washington Stephen Irving. Stephen to his friends.
Crane, Washington Irving, Denmark. Put anything in there.
Well, okay. What do you know about the story before we get to the part I want to share with you?
Ichabod Crane is in love with a woman, and he's a scaredy cat, and so everyone makes fun of him.
That's true.
And then there's something with a headless horse. Does he become the headless horseman?
I think he's hunted by him.
So you know that the Headless Horseman is a feature in this legend.
Yes.
All right.
It's the cool part, right?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to read you a passage from the original story by Washington Irving that's kind of setting up the scene. So this is before anything has happened. This is just sort of to introduce it's not the very beginning, but it's towards the beginning of the and it's describing the main character, who's Ichabod Crane, is the schoolmaster of the glen where they live. And it's describing kind of his pastime. So here's how it goes. Another of his sources of fearful pleasure was to pass long winter evenings with the old Dutch wives as they sat spinning by the fire with a row of apples roasting and spluttering along the hearth, and listen to their marvelous tales of ghosts and goblins and haunted fields and haunted brooks and haunted bridges and haunted houses, and particularly of the Headless Horseman, or Galloping Hessian of the Hollow, as they sometimes called him. He would delight them equally by his anecdotes of witchcraft and of the direful omens and portentous sights and sounds in the air which prevailed in the earlier times of Connecticut, and would frighten them woefully with speculations upon comets and shooting stars, and with the alarming fact that the world did absolutely turn round and that they were half the time topsy-turvy. But if there was a pleasure in all this, while snugly cuddling in the chimney corner of a chamber that was all of a ruddy glow from the crackling wood fire, and where, of course, no specter dared to show his face. It was dearly purchased by the terrors of his subsequent walk homewards. What fearful shapes and shadows beset his path amidst the dim and ghastly glare of the snowy night? With what wistful look did he eye every trembling ray of light streaming across the waste fields from some distant window? How often was he appalled by some shrub covered with snow, which, like a sheeted spectre, beset his very path? How often did he shrink with curdling awe at the sound of his own steps on the frosty crust beneath his feet, and dread to look over his shoulder lest he should behold some uncouth being tramping close behind him? And how often was he thrown into complete dismay by some rushing blast howling among the trees in the idea that it was the galloping Hessian on one of his nightly scourings? All these, however, were mere terrors of the night, phantoms of the mind that walk in darkness. And though he had seen many specters in his time, and been more than once beset by Satan in diverse shapes in his lonely perambulations, yet daylight put an end to all these evils, and he would have passed a pleasant life of it, in despite of the devil and all his works, if his path had not been crossed by a being that causes more perplexity to mortal man than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together, and that was
The Headless Horseman.
I'm going to stop there. Yeah. So,
Okay.
reactions? Thoughts?
Really beautiful description of the fear of the dark.
Yeah, that's great. Was he's reading to the Dutch wives, right? We all love a Dutch wife. And was
Especially in groups. Like, what's the group noun for a Dutch wife? Group? It's
a windmill of Dutch wives.
Really going stereotypical there. All right.
A low country of Dutch wives. Was he startling them with tales of science?
there was.
They're like,
there was
oh God, the
moment
world is round.
Yeah, well, it was. Exactly right. So it was, they were startled to find out that they were upside down sometimes and that there's shooting stars.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Satan was brought into it. I heard that.
Yeah. And wanted to talk a little bit about, so he goes specifically to hear these stories that the Dutch wives are telling about ghosts and haunted houses and haunted bridges and haunted glens, and right. And he seems to enjoy them, but on the way home, it's not as the enjoyment seems to wane a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's when his mind is running amok with all these tales, right? On the way home. I feel like this is frequently something I hear from my wife, who enjoys watching horror films with me until the moment when the film is over, and then she's like, we have to plan when we can watch these films.
Yep.
Because if we have to go to a bed within the next hour or 3 hours, then she's like, that's going to ruin me. I'm just going to be up all night thinking about the film.
Whatever. And because of the cinematic qualities of the film, or
definitely not in an analytical way, in that if it was successfully startling and horrific, then now her imagination, like Ichabod's, will be alight at every slightest imaginary provocation.
Yeah, Nikki has a very strong rule that it must be daylight outside, and this perfectly fits with the tale, but must be daylight outside if we're even going to consider a horror film. If we're even going to touch on that, it's got to be daylight outside, which during October I do marathon horror movies, so it's tough for me.
Yeah, and I don't want to act like I'm any cooler about this. I also would prefer to watch a horror movie like in the light of day, but I'm just like I can't say that out loud, so I'll just be like, yeah, let's watch that movie in the dark. That's cool. That's fine. Like I'm never going to say otherwise.
You're like, let's invite 15 people over, though.
Yeah. And let's have a bunch of pizza.
Yes.
Xbox on the other.
Several breaks.
Yeah.
that's right. Why does it matter what time it is or what the status of the sunrise is?
Because there are real horrors or things like I feel predisposed to fear things, right? And I think some people are maybe better at conquering those fears or paying them less heed. There's certainly some things that like don't scare me, that probably scare other people, things that do scare me more. Like, we were talking about roller coasters the other day. I hate a roller coaster. I can't get on a roller coaster. I've been on a roller coaster. I've had fun on a roller coaster. I totally get why people do it. And I still just have very little motivation to go on a roller coaster because of a fear, like a mostly unfounded, but not impossible chance that I don't come back from that roller coaster.
Yeah. The night is where the unimaginable happens, right? I mean, even just nothing is illuminated for you in the same way.
But the same things can happen.
Of course. But your mind is going to conjure something that's far more terrible than what you can actually see. We love that concrete evidence of what we can see in front of us. That science, like I can use my senses to actually explore there. It's why horror films are often so dark, in not only their content, but also like lighting. That's very rare, except for Midsummer, if you guys have seen that.
Yeah,
that's the only horror movie I've ever seen that's incredibly bright almost the whole way through. But generally.
Well, do you want to know why this might be? You want to talk a little bit about what's going on inside your brain that maybe we can dig into this a little bit? First of all, do you know what it was that was more frightening to Ichabod than all the ogres, witches put together, the ghosts, the goblins?
Satan? Satan was in there somewhere.
I said the Headless Horseman, but I don't think he's introduced yet, so I was going to say the dog.
Yeah. He says, he would have passed a pleasant life despite of all the devils in his works if his path had not been crossed by a being that causes more perplexity to mortal man than ghosts, goblins, and the whole race of witches put together, and that was a woman.
Oh, he's in love.
Yeah.
He's so awkward.
Yeah.
So
some things never
been
change.
there, Ichabod.
There's a whole online community of Ichabods nowadays.
Stay tuned for the next podcast where Ron unpacks the problems with
men online. Anyway, so speaking of fear response and sensory data, so here's what goes on in your brain. Your brain's got two paths for fear processing, and we'll call them the low path and the high path just to keep them straight. Okay. All right. So low path is that your senses sense something. So sight, usually sound.
I hear a sound. I hear a wolf on the distance on the moors.
Right. And your thalamus is kind of like the part of your brain that's like the telephone directory. Like it sends the information to the right part of the brain, and it sends that information directly to the amygdala, which is an almond-shaped organ kind of in the base of your brain. And I think it's like your lizard brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so the amygdala can take that response or take that data and say, oh my gosh, there's something to be afraid of. And it immediately will trigger responses, which include signaling other parts of your brain to release cortisol, which is the stress hormone, to release adrenaline, to get your face pumping or your heart pumping. And that all happens without thinking. Like that's the response when like you open the cupboard and there's a spider or whatever, and like you jump back and you haven't had time to process even what you've seen.
Yeah.
That response is why it's called the low path. It's the precortical path. It bypasses the conscious part of your brain and it just reacts to it. Yep. And there's three possible reactions. Do you know what they are?
Fight, flight, fright. No, there is a third one. What is it?
Well, let's check if the first two are correct.
That's good. So fight is correct. Yeah. And fight means that you can
punch it, you can bite it, you can kick it.
It means
defeat the thing you're afraid
your
of.
amygdala thinks that you can kill whatever or defeat whatever's in front of you, right? You can switch the bug, you can, right? And flight is correct. That means you
run away. The other one is, if this was a computer RPG, it would be dialogue.
You can persuade the thing to not be scary.
Yeah. Freeze is the third one.
Yeah.
And I think we see it more in other animals, but it is available as a response. So
is freeze supposed to be a sort of a period of analysis? Is it like more info required?
No, I mean so that happens during the period of freeze, but the freeze response they think could be related to. So one of the purposes of the freeze response is to avoid predation. So it especially like it's a Jurassic Park movie, right? If you stay still, then the predator won't see you as much.
Or like cows, that just
Right.
No, I don't. I don't work with cows.
they're constantly in a prey state. It's so sad.
But I've seen it I have seen it in humans, but it usually happens like it responds to a loud noise. Like because like you just freeze for a second, and then it does give you the time to process what's going on.
Does that mean are we familiar with fainting goat syndrome?
Yeah.
Is that like the most overdeveloped freeze response of all time? Because it is loud noises. And
that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Drop.
Is that also the possum, playing dead? Is that an evolved freeze? Like, oh,
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that's the low path. That's the like big danger, immediate. You don't have to think about it. Your brain reacts. Okay. Then we have what's called the cortical path, or the high path. So similar process, you get some kind of stimulus, information from your sensory organs, goes to the thalamus, who then, rather than sending it to the amygdala, sends it to the cortex, sends it to the part of your brain that is conscious and can evaluate the danger. The cortex also then connects to the amygdala. So if it is dangerous, then the cortex can send the same fear signals to the amygdala and cause the same fear responses. It just happens a little bit slower because that first step has to happen where your brain processes the danger to determine, hey, I need to do something. And then the amygdala does the same fear responses.
So in one of those, we get an opportunity to think or rationalize what our response will be. And then the other one it's a sort of immediate. And I think that explains actually a lot of the problem. Like, I enjoy watching horror films, but usually alone or with just like my wife or like one other friend or something. Like, I can't do them in groups. My friends used to be like, let's all go out to the horror movie. And I was like, no, I don't want to. I'm too scared. But really what I was afraid of was like not being able to control when I'm afraid, that's why I don't like the jump scare or the sudden I fear that low path, the fact that for an instant I will be reduced to a base creature and I will not have mastery over myself, and I will react in a potentially silly way, a way that will seem silly in hindsight, perhaps. Right?
So you're worried about the shame that
yes,
is
100%. Yeah.
The shame of just the biological evolution of your brain, like that's nothing to be ashamed of.
Absolutely.
I know, but that's where I'm coming from right now. Yep. Or I have. Hopefully, I'm better. You fixed me now, Don. Let's go watch Terrifier.
Oh my gosh.
So though, if we go back and thinking to Ichabod, right? Like, which one of those paths is operating in Ichabod's situation?
Oh, the high path, right? When he's walking at night, yeah.
Because there's nothing there to be afraid of. The things that he's noticing are shadows and bushes and
a shrub. That was. I almost laughed really hard during that part.
But have you had that experience?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I remember that my. Are we familiar with Tales from the Crypt?
Mm-hmm.
The character, for any listeners who don't know, it was a very cool show that, because I was too young to watch, there was a lot of very adult content in them a lot of the time, where they'd have some scandalous things because it came from pulp comics. But I was allowed to watch a lot of times the intros to the show, in which the crypt keeper, who was this decrepit, basically a decaying corpse, who talked in a very high-pitched voice and had a high-pitched laugh, he would introduce the shows. And I was fascinated with him as a kid. But he really scared the hell out of me. Like it just the way that he was animated and propped up. And there was one night, classic, my parents are going to watch Tales from the Crypt, watch the introduction. So embarrassing. Yeah, this one is for me. This was really embarrassing. Watch the introduction, go to bed. I'm thinking about him. And of course, outside of my window, I just hear, and I'm thinking it's him walking outside of my room. I've watched this too many times. He's come for me now. What I later found out, it was my dad stepping outside to just let the dog out to go to the bathroom. But in that moment, I got so scared, I froze. And this is why this is relative. I froze literally to the point that I thought, I cannot move. He's going to be here and I can't move. I took a breath in as quickly as I could because I was having a panic attack, and I went and then ran out of my bed because I thought, if I've got enough speed, he can't get me. I fling myself into my parents' office at the time, completely out of breath, and all I could get out was, Crypt keepers gonna get me, and then just fell down and passed out. I couldn't go from there. That was it. There was that much fear in that moment. And now all of that was created. But yeah, it's interesting that you talked about the different paths, because like I kind of experienced almost all of those stages. Like there's a little bit of fight in terms of like if I run right now, he can't get me, but I've got to get out of this frozen stage.
So why did you watch him then?
I just had to. I liked him so much. I always had this fascination. I remember going, again, walking around in Blockbuster with my dad because he would watch horror movies, and I'd ask him about every single one of them. I think there was like a certain amount of danger that I was like, I wanted to be around, you know, of like, oh, this is really creepy. I should be able to handle this. Dad, did you see this one? And I was, of course, always so impressed. Like, you watched that too? And that one as well? You must be so brave. I was always obsessed with, kind of horror icons. I always loved the world. I still do. I'd like absolutely love horror, but when I was younger.
So when the Crypt Keeper was on your TV and you were watching him to do his monologue, was that scary?
It was. My heart would start pounding a lot faster. But then there's a little bit of like, my parents thought I could handle it. So I'd go, I got it, because I wanted to see him and do his thing. There was also a cartoon on at the time. So there was like a kid's cartoon version of him as well. And so that was where a lot of the fascination started, because it was like a for kids version. And so maybe that was there. But yeah, I wanted to be kind of close to it. I wanted to be just close enough.
So was it scarier when he was on TV, or was it scarier when you were in your room?
I guess it's scarier when I'm in my room, because I'm creating another, what if he did this? You know, even though.
Yeah, well, at least when he's on the TV, he's contained by the TV, right? And like you don't know, what the script demands he will do next, right? So he might shock you in that moment or something, right? But at least you can rationalize this is all projected onto a screen, right? But as soon if you carry that with you from the screen, and now you're going about your day, now he can be anywhere. Right?
He can be anywhere. Showing up in my closet, going, "Hey, kiddies!"
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That's what he sounded like.
I do an okay impression of him. Yeah, I like him. Yeah.
Well, what you're describing actually has a distinction that others have described. So I want to share with you a little bit from a writer named Anne Radcliffe. So she's a 1700s English author, famous for Gothic literature, which is famous for being the first type of scary stories that we have, right? So The Italian is one of hers. The Mysteries of Udolpho is another one that, which basically is like, scary castle on a crag. And
is there like a theme? I've read The Italian, but is there like a theme that kind of connects her works? Like what is the kind of horror she is interested in?
Well, I don't want to tell you yet because
no, Ron.
Because it has to do with this piece that I'm going to quote first, which is also a fictional piece, but it's nonfiction. It's nonfiction written as a dialogue. What it is. So, and it's called on the Supernatural in Poetry. So it's a made up dialogue between two persons about what is scary. And one of them is bringing up the part that sublimity. So this idea that something is overwhelming is one of the sources of fear, which goes back to Edmund Burke, which we talked about last time before, a couple times ago.
Yes.
Anyways, so one of the persons says, they must be men of very cold imaginations, with whom certainty is more terrible than surmise. Terror and horror are so far opposite that the first expands the soul and awakens the faculties to a higher degree of life. The other contracts, freezes, and nearly annihilates them.
Huh.
So the distinction being made is whether what you're being afraid of is in front of you, which is horrible, or something that you are imagining, something that is less certain, something that is vague in its description or its access to you. That seems to be of a higher level, and that's what he says expands the soul. And that would be called terror. So there's making a distinction between terror, which is basically your imagination, and horror, which is an external stimulus you're responding to.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Because one, I think that describes, Doug, earlier you asked, like, I don't know why I was so interested in it. And I have also always had a hard time. Like, I do really love like horror literature, horror films, like engaging with terrifying media. Even though I would consider myself like a rather Ichabod about these sorts of things, but they always sort of hold a sort of fascination. And I think when you encounter a really good piece of horror media, whether that's a novel or a film or whatever, it does have a sort of I don't know. I've always associated it to a degree with enlarging or increasing my awareness of something. Like it's hard to like sublimity is kind of what what Radcliffe is getting at, right? And I think there is that measure to it as well, right? Like when we encounter the sublime, there is a sort of terror aspect, but I don't consider it negative. In fact, I find it an emotion or an experience I seek, that I enjoy.
Yeah. There's a video game that was, I believe, just re-released last night. That is from when I was much younger, called Silent Hill, and this is the second Silent Hill. So Silent Hill 2 is remastered. It's considered a staple classic of the horror genre in video games, and I think 90% of the reason that game gets the credit it does for how horrific it is everything is covered in a layer of fog that you cannot see but 4 to 5 feet in front of you. And you have a radio on you at all times that starts to kind of echo static when something is in the fog that is going to come after you. And it's interesting that both of those things, like radio static and fog, are both kind of like, it's interesting because I look at them as cognates visually and audibly. Like I look at them as the exact same thing in some respects. And I think that those very much rely on the terror of what it could be, because generally I think in like the first sequence of the game, you're fighting the same type of enemy over and over again. And they didn't really need to design another type of enemy, because the second you hear that radio go off and you know it's close, you always think, but what if it's bigger than the last one I saw? And that's what carries you through the entire game. It's like that never stops feeling that way. And that's why I think it's such a classic. And I think that relies a lot on terror, because you do eventually see the things and it gets into horror, but that it's very terrifying.
But the terror and horror are separated by the unknown, right? What we do not know becomes the realm of terror.
Correct.
And what we see in front of us is the realm of horror.
Right. Because terror is activated by your imagination. So it's your imagination building what it is that you are afraid of, as opposed to something that you're actually encountering.
So, I'm sorry.
I think that unknown factor is what Radcliffe would, I mean, I don't know if this is exact, but what Radcliffe says is, what was her exact word? She said it's uplifting or something.
Expands the soul.
Expands the soul, right? Expansive, right? I think the unknown must be that quality that gives it that expansive property, right?
Yeah. Oh, all I was going to add is I was curious about the idea of, do I have it right that if something is like enshrouded in fog and like the static going off, eventually you see the thing, would we still consider that terror? Or because I can see the fog and hear the noise, does it require 100% imagination in this way? Does that make sense? No.
I think if you're seeing through the fog and you see a figure through the fog, it's still terrible, because I don't know what, like, okay, there is something there, but I'm not sure what it is.
Intention and motive and detail are
I want to make sure
for you.
We had the definition straight, because there's a really interesting line where the terror becomes horror in that game, where you do see everything. So, and it's not as scary anymore.
So to circle back to your question about the thread running through Radcliffe's work. So I think it is this this emphasis on the unknown and the uncertain. So one of the shticks, for lack of a better word, that she utilizes in The Mysteries of Udolpho is this painting that is supposed to be so horrible that it's covered with a veil, and the owner of the castle like keeps it covered, and nobody's supposed to look at it, and nobody's supposed to see it, and Emily, who's the main character of the story, is in the castle, and she's being led around by one of the maids, and the maid's like, "Oh no, I don't even know. I haven't heard anything about it, but don't look over there. I have to, emphasizing that this is something that we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to." So Emily later sneaks back into the room And it says that she passed on with faltering steps, and having paused a moment at the door before she attempted to open it, she then hastily entered the chamber and went towards the picture, which appeared to be enclosed in a frame of uncommon size that hung in a dark part of the room. She paused again, and then with a timid hand lifted the veil, but instantly let it fall, perceiving that what it had concealed was no picture, and before she could leave the chamber, she dropped senseless on the floor. So even in that, like the main character has an experience, and we're left in the dark.
Yeah.
And it just builds on that mystery over and over again throughout the text as it leads up to that or building on that terror idea.
I think this is also why people have such sort of vehement reactions to a horror film that ends or functions on a twist that they don't find satisfactory. This is, I think, explains the whole sort of outrage against M. Night Shyamalan at some point, right?
Sure.
Famous horror film director who, really hit it out of the park with a couple good ones, but then sort of became considered a little more camp as his twists sort of became more contrived, right? Because almost all of them function on a sort of imperfect sense of what is happening and going on that creates an eerie and mysterious and enthralling sort of atmosphere. But then as soon as the twist happens, if that twist doesn't, like whatever's behind that veil of that picture, if we find out and it does not match what I imagined, I'm going to be mad, right?
Or if it's less intense. Like, I remember the Signs was that for me, right? Like the, but actually you bring up a good point, and this is kind of where the seed of this episode comes from, because Doug and I were talking about the movie A Quiet Place.
Yeah.
And I loved the movie A Quiet Place when it came out. But I didn't see A Quiet Place 2. And I knew I didn't want to, but I hadn't really thought about it until Doug asked me about it, and what I told you, right? And then we hadn't thought this all the way through, but I told you that I liked A Quiet Place because you don't see the monster.
Yeah, it's always, if you do, it's part of it, and it's moving at a speed that you can't. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And then the trailers for A Quiet Place 2, they were everywhere, and I didn't want seeing A Quiet Place 2 to ruin my experience of A Quiet Place.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now that I have all of these terms straight, so what I liked about A Quiet Place was that it raised that terror. It expanded my soul.
It terrified you.
It did.
Instead of horrified you.
Right. Where the Quiet Place 2 would I think sink it, because horror is at a different level. It's a lower level than terror, according to the way that Burke and Radcliffe are classifying them.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think immediately about John Carpenter's The Thing, which is very firmly rooted in the 80s. You see every single mutation of that monster that exists. And that movie will always be stuck in the 80s because of those kind of animatronic things that he created and all of the practical effects that he kind of put together to make that what it is. But what's interesting about that film is it is the terror of not knowing who the thing is.
Right.
You're constantly wondering who on the crew is infected now and is going to become the thing. And that's why I think that movie continues to endure.
Which is also its most terrifying scene, is the one where they finally devise the test by which they will identify the thing, right? That is, it's not when, he's eating the dog or anything.
No.
The monster isn't even in the most terrifying scene, right?
Yeah, they're just checking blood platelets and we're all wondering. Yeah, it's so great.
So I think one of the things, so that's clearly what I've identified. And then I was also thinking about Stephen King's It.
Yes.
Right. Which, have you read?
I've not read it. I know what happens in it. I've never even seen any of the films or the miniseries or anything. But
I didn't see the two most recent films. I saw the Tim Curry version back in the 90s. Have you seen Red?
So haven't read. I've seen both versions. Yeah, I've consumed all of the media, visual media.
So it was published in 1986, and I enjoyed it on a school trip that I had in the late 80s, and it was my first Stephen King, and it was my first 1,000-page book. So it was a point of pride for me, and oh my gosh, it was so much fun. It was such a good book. I thought it was so well structured. It's scary. It's great. until like 50 pages from the end. And at 50 pages from the end, you see the monster. And it like everything that I was afraid of the whole way through the book, like it crashes because I loved being terrified. I loved the terror. But then when it gets to the point where they have to actually encounter the creature at the end of the story, then that terror goes away. It like evaporates. And I think that's really an interesting phenomenon, because it wasn't just like, that was my first experience with it, but it's not only that where that happens. That happens a lot in scary movies. Like even Friday the 13th, like I know what Jason looks like, but it's where it's not knowing where he might be. That's the scary part. Once he appears on screen, well, he's right there. Like, that's not scary anymore.
Unless it's Jason's mom in the first one. You never know. Don't forget. Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that. I definitely would agree with that. That's why I think so many of these movies, especially, and books applies as well, but I've seen so many horror movies. That could be a sub podcast of its own if we wanted to do. But the greatest ones always have an incredible cast of characters that you are looking to that are separate from the monster. If the characters are really memorable or you sympathize with them in some way, I find that the monster can almost shift and change. And that's why it's interesting. The new it's separated into two parts. And the part where they are kids, it is so emotionally moving. It's you are so invested in them because each of their stories is so powerful that I think Pennywise could be anything, and he kind of is anything in that first one. But because you're so invested in them and their struggles and their insecurities and what they've gone through, it's just phenomenal because you're more terrified for them because you know how vulnerable they are. Yeah,
the novel is structured that way too, in two parts.
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
I think also like there's like I think horror films are actually very difficult to make because kind of to the point you're talking about, Don, like resolution is very difficult to pull off in a horror story. Yeah. Because I think of the ones I enjoy the most tend to have a sort of ambiguous resolution or it cannot be the heroes conquered the problem and the day is saved resolution. Right. Like I'm sure you can pull that off, but usually there has to be, there's always that, and then, they're walking away and then, but who's that behind them? Did the monster really survive? Because I think that's sort of key to the experience of horror and terror, right? Is especially if we're talking about the unknown, right? The unknown can never be known. No all unknowns will ever be all known, right? That seems to me like to be a sort of paradox of the genre. And the way we tell stories need resolutions. We love a resolution, but our imagination never has a resolution. That the sort of the terrors we can visit upon ourselves is unending. Therefore, a horror story cannot resolve the crisis it sort of creates, I think. And sometimes when it can be done, but usually I think ambiguously, right? Yeah. Was that really a good ending for that character? Did they really solve that problem? Are we really safe? Those are the sorts of like questions I think the good ones end on.
And it's interesting because Stephen King, I've heard so many times brought up in the context of just can't stick the landing. Like just always endings are a struggle for him. And we brought up M. Night Shyamalan, exact same thing. A few of them he nailed it, but for the most part always blows it at the end. And you're right. I think that there's something innate to the cliche of, and they got away, or did they, is almost always generally it's the best choice because it leaves you with that sense of terror. Yeah.
Just shout out to Stephen King though, because he does build the best psychological terror.
Yeah,
it throughout, and I think I would argue The Shining is probably his best.
Yeah,
because of that ambiguous ending. Like Jack dies, like that's the end of that story. But like,
what's up with that hotel?
What really is going on in that hotel?
Absolutely,
right.
Yeah.
So that elevates that up to, and as long as we're talking about King, to just make sure that we've covered all our bases, because King also has written about horror writing, and he finds the same categories that Anne Radcliffe mentioned, which is terror as being the highest version, and then horror. But he adds a third category actually. Stephen King adds a category called revulsion. So revulsion is the gore. It's the
bugs,
the shock. Yeah. And
it's you with the rice on your face.
It's right. That's what it is. Yeah. So he's got 3 categories where Radcliffe has 2, but
I'm wondering, since it seems to be our hypothesis, Don, that we are attaching Radcliffe's definitions of horror to the actual brain chemistry, the way we react to horror. Is there a way we can map King's revulsion onto our physiology or biology?
Well, I think we'd have to speculate about it, and I think it depends upon what your reaction is to things that are revolting. Thank you. Because
revulsivatory
for terror, the brain chemistry that's going through the cortical process. That's your imagination creating a problem that doesn't really exist, but then causing a physical reaction in your brain by signaling your amygdala to prepare you for fight or flight. And then horror is probably it's the lizard brain reaction, right? Because the monster's there, you have to react to the monster.
Yep.
So I don't know. So there's only the 2 paths. So I'm wondering for the gore, right? Is it like, if it's shocking, like I need to flee from the gore? So is it lizard brain reaction, or is it, oh, something terrible must have happened here, let me imagine what that was, and that create so neither way, it's because there's only the 2 paths. So I don't know which way do you think it works.
It's because you're thinking with the wrong organ here. If your stomach is about to throw up, it's revulsion.
He's
sick?
on it.
Absolutely. Let's respect the whole body, gentlemen. I'm just saying.
This was. I'm wondering if any of you or our listeners have had a similar experience. But there's a famous story in my family where we pulled up to. It was just like a boring, normal Sunday. We pulled up to a mall or something, and for some reason, my sister or brother, can't even remember who, was sick in the car, and as soon as they got out of the car, they threw up. And then that caused me to throw up. And then another one of us also threw up. Right. That seems
that's also Stephen King. That's Stand By Me. That's
yep.
I've never seen Stand By Me. So that's the revulsion trigger, right?
There is nothing funnier to me. There have been so many school bus field trip type situations where you'll hear a student and then another student and then another. And that to me, that's the highest level of humor. I am always in tears laughing, trying so hard not to laugh, but it's just so funny to hear the chain reaction. But revulsion, it seems to catch on in a certain way. Yeah. So
we've, and I've got one more piece of literature I want to talk about, but since we've been kind of heady with Washington Irving and Anne Radcliffe, just to help kind of ground examples of this, what we're thinking. Can you think of examples maybe from movies that would be this imaginative terror, and different ones that are horror and different ones that are revulsion that would kind of clarify what we're talking about?
Yeah.
I think Jaws, operates in the first half on the terror, and then the second half becomes sort of the adventure of horror,
which is why I think Jaws 2 and 3 and 4 are held to the esteem that they're held to, because Jaws 1
very high esteem. The lowest.
Right. Yeah. Jaws 1, the shark is not seen for the majority of the film.
Yeah.
It's only at the very end. And most of it is just, you see the remnants of what the shark has done rather than seeing the shark itself.
I always argue that Jaws is 2 films. There's the horror, the terror portion in which who's going to get bit next, and then the action sequence blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to say it's the first blockbuster, it's because the second part's an action movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think through and through of how are we going to beat this thing? And we see it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes away that fear. I'm never scared. Even the music in those sections is so triumphant and pull the boat around. Dun, 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 dun. And it's I'm not scared at all right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then when that head rolls into
when they got to go find the sunk yacht, that still gets me every time.
Oh, everybody. That's one of the best jump scares ever. Ever. Yeah.
That would be horror.
Sure would. Mm-hmm. Sure would.
Yeah.
And a little revulsion, because he's
a little gross. Yeah. That's true.
But revulsion, it takes it another step further. You brought up Terrifier, didn't you? As an example.
Yeah. That's
Have you seen that film?
No, I remember seeing the trailers and stuff.
It's just, it's not really, it is horrific in that there is a monster clamp, but it's all about what is the most violent and disturbing kill? What's the worst way we can leave a corpse, and how long can we focus on the gore and blood? I think that's the point of those films. Yeah.
That makes me think of Hostel. Hostel is
same thing.
It's,
Torture.
It's revolting. It would be a terrible situation to be in for sure. But the point of the movie is to gross people out.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a whole wave of Italian horror movies in the 70s called giallo films, and they would just hold on the kill forever. Like, it just would be how many different ways. There was like an insane one. There's a film called Suspiria in which the first victim, are you familiar with this film?
No.
At all? First victim, like, I believe is stabbed, falls through glass, and then like literally falls into a noose and is hung. And then like was stabbed in the guts, so the guts fall out. It's so absurd. You can't help but go like, come on, like this is just insane. But it's part of the revulsion is a part of the genre. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exorcist. How would you classify Exorcist?
Ooh.
I think Exorcist is horror, right? Because the threat is always contained. You know where it is. You start to learn the rules of the threat, and
it's a lot about visualizing the threat.
Yeah,
right. So it's
her head spinning, and the horrifying voice.
But terror in the beginning, as I think as you're seeing some of the scenes and wondering what they're going to do. But then also revulsion, because there's things I will not even repeat right now that she says that I go, oh, and I still think to this day, and I go like, awful.
Which is a psychological revulsion, right? As opposed to like the vomit or the blood revulsion that we.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. And are you guys too little to know the Amityville Horror?
Oh no, I'm very the most famous. Get out!
I've seen all the documentaries about it, but never the actual film.
Really?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
And so that I think I would classify as terror.
Yep.
Because you never really see what the entity is that is.
Yeah.
And that film's famous for the inclusion of subliminal images there's like a few scenes where it's got like a couple frames of faces and things like that. So
sure. Yeah.
All right. So one thing that I think is interesting, just to wrap us up, is this seems to have been intuited by authors way before it was identified by Anne Radcliffe in 1826 when she wrote that piece that I read. Because trying to think of the earliest monsters, right? We got Greek mythology monsters, right? But if we bring it into the realm of English, we've got Beowulf and his first fight with Grendel.
Yeah,
right. And Grendel is so it's a creature that's never really described. Like, I don't know. Yeah. It's described as a demon, but it has a physical form. It's causing physical harm to men. It
has a claw.
It has a talon, right? Yeah. But it never, like, I don't know. Is it an ogre? Is it a troll? Is it how tall is it? Like, none of those details are ever filled in. And Seamus Heaney, Irish poet who did the translation of Beowulf in 1999, talks about this, and he contrasts it rather with the dragon. He says the dragon has a wonderful inevitability about him and a unique glamour. But then he gets to Grendel. He says Grendel comes alive in the reader's imagination as a kind of dog breath in the dark, a fear of collision with some hard-boned and immensely strong android frame, a mixture of Caliban and hoplite.
Yeah, right. The warrior qualities of Grendel, I thought, were always the key thing, right? He has to be horrifying to a martial culture that believes it can solve its problems through warfare, right? Mm-hmm. And they cannot solve the Grendel problems, right?
Right. And so what I think is so unique is that it was probably developed over time, right, through oral tradition, and we have one written version of this story. But even through all that time, the storytellers knew not to over-describe this monster, not to give this monster a concrete, definite figure form, because that makes it more terrifying. He is the shadow stalker. He is the the flesh slayer. And then and he's called there's one other word. It's called the aglica. In Old English means monster. But it's a word that can be used for like a terrifying monster like Grendel, but also for a warrior.
Like an intimidating foe.
Well, so that word has gone out of our language, but I think it's interesting is that we maintain that comparison. So you can call, somebody's a beast. Oh, he's a beast.
Yes.
He's a monster, man.
Yeah.
Right. And it could mean that he's a Grendel, or it could mean that he's just super strong and intimidating.
Right. Yeah. I find it really fascinating because I'm thinking of the oral tradition, and I'm wondering how many times this was told, and as the orator is speaking the story into existence, if this is something that's refined by watching the reactions of those that he's telling it to, right? Like, looking out, and maybe in some of those descriptions, like there are versions of Grendel that are fully described, but that's when he would watch his audience kind of fade away. And I wonder if in that natural, because I don't know, we've kind of waxed on this before, but the absolutely almost supernatural power of storytelling and like in the order to captivate the human soul. And I'm wondering in those moments if just naturally where they get this from is just looking into the eyes and hearts of people and seeing like, the less that I say about this terrible thing, the more they scream when they go to bed.
And the more they like yearn for it though also, right?
Yes.
Like you were saying, why did you have to watch the horror films as a kid? Because there's an allure there. You have to, don't threaten me with something terrible because I got it right. Like you need to know.
Yes.
And probably some of those storytellers satisfied that need for their audiences, right? But it was probably different every time. The same way, like when they're adapting your favorite book. Oh, how are they going to depict this creature, this monster, right? Like, and I gotta know.
I wonder, because I was using Tales of the Crypt at the beginning of this. I'm wondering, again, for those not familiar, he was the one who just opened the tale. He was the one who said, we're going to read a story tonight about this. And then it had nothing to do with him for the rest of the episode. But to me, that was the guy who was going to get me. And what's interesting is when I became an adult and actually watched Tales for the Crypt, I went, oh, he's the storyteller. So I don't know what I was so afraid of. And I created all of that terror in my mind over something that didn't even exist for that purpose. Yeah.
And I remember having the opposite reaction.
Because he was incredibly silly.
Well, he was silly, but then like some of the stories were so uncomfortable to watch that like when he reappeared to either do the next segue, like it was a catharsis. Like, oh,
very much so.
I don't have to watch that horrible thing anymore. It's just this Muppet.
Yes, because he was super silly. That's the thing. He's very comedic, but also I think it's that idea of kind of the comic relief in horror is that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah.
Well, thank you all. Talking about scary stuff.
Oh yeah.
Thought so. Since we opened with Ichabod, do you want to close with Ichabod? Want to find
I
out
would love to.
I would love to.
What happens at the end of his story?
Send me with some shivers, Don.
So he winds up being chased on his horse Gunpowder by the Headless Horseman, and here's how it ends. Next morning, the old horse was found without his saddle, and with a bridle under his feet, soberly cropping the grass at his master's gate. Ichabod did not make his appearance at breakfast. Dinner hour came, but no Ichabod. The boys assembled at the schoolhouse and strolled idly about the banks of the brook, but no schoolmaster. Hans van Ripper now began to feel some uneasiness about the fate of the poor Ichabod and his saddle. An inquiry was set on foot, and after diligent investigation, they came upon his traces. In one part of the road leading to the church was found the saddle trampled in the dirt. The tracks of the horse's hooves, deeply dented in the road and evidently at furious speed, were traced to the bridge, beyond which, on the bank of a broad part of the brook, where the water ran deep and black, was found the hat of the unfortunate Ichabod, and close beside it, a shattered pumpkin.